So Jakob, you directed the first 3 episodes of TNT's The Alienist. You also served as one of the executive producers on the show. When you got this script, what about it attracted you to it? What made you want to lend your talents as a director to it?
I think when I first read the book, what struck me was that Caleb Carr's story, it's like a roller coaster ride that takes the audience by the hand and transports it onto the streets of New York. It's a visual time machine. But that apart, what struck me most also was the timelessness of the story. Our arena is New York, a city at that moment still trying to find its own identity. But the story deals, apart from being about the hunt on a serial killer, it deals with class division. It deals with immigration. It talks about an elite trying to keep a status quo. It's a story about either embracing new ideas or being afraid of them. So I think the timelessness of the story intrigued me the most.
You bring that up, and actually, you know, I was having this conversation with your production designer, and about the approach that you guys took to it. And it doesn't, stylistically, there doesn't seem to be this kind of sheen to it, you know, that we often see in period shows that kind of makes it separate from the times that we're living in now. There's sort of a grittier feeling to it. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think talking to Mara Schlup-Lepera, production designer, and Michael Kaplan, the costume designer, but also to PJ Dillon, our DOP, I think authenticity was key. We really wanted to be a visual time machine to bring the audience onto the streets of New York and make them part of that world. And I think we became obsessed with detail. We became obsessed with research. And I think all that was very important to make this series feel visceral and real and authentic, and therefore hopefully, well, believable. Because these, you know, human nature hasn't changed. The world hasn't changed that much. So I think bringing the audience, authenticity, that was key for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up research, and I'm curious. I mean, were there things that you looked at that really popped out at you, or things you read, or images you saw?
Yeah, of course. Well, before I started this job, or when I took the job, I had this crash course, a 7-day crash course given to me by Richard Zacks, a historian in New York. So he took me around places, teach me about the history. And what struck me most, one of the little details that he told me was that, well, there were some fortresses in New York. They still are there. That held soldiers back in the Gilded Age, not to protect the city from the outside, but to protect a city from within, just in case there would be an uprising and they would have had some kind of a French Revolution on their hands. Mm-hmm. So no, but that was part of our research. I think what makes the Alienist unique also is that we literally, through Chrysler's character, witnessed the birth of profiling. We witnessed the birth of forensics. None of that existed. So I think that's that part of the authenticity.
Well, and I was going to ask you about that as well. I mean, obviously, there's normal research that you're doing into the period, but since so much of the story is about the nitty-gritty of the birth of forensic science, I mean, did you do any research into that? Were there things that kind of jumped out at you about that you wanted to use in the show?
Well, I think what was important to us is to illustrate to the audience that all of this was very new. Well, Freud and Jung had just written their books. Chrysler is embracing their ideas. And when he tries to bring these ideas to the world, there's a lot of resistance against them. And I think it's him representing the light or new ideas and facing a lot of resistance. I think that. So we looked a lot in, of course, their writings. I think Caleb Carr's book gave a lot of research already.
Mm-hmm. This is also, of course, a thriller, and there's a lot of very tense moments in it. Can you talk a bit about some of the ways that you created tension in these episodes?
I think what we wanted the audience to become is a voyeur. We have a character like Chrysler, constantly, because he's an alienist, he's a psychiatrist, observing people. The killer in his own way, is praying, observing on little boys. So I think making the audience a voyeur was as a conceptually key. And how we did that was the camera a lot of times outstays its welcome. So the camera keeps lingering on a character and therefore hopefully creates a sense of unease. One of the examples I was looking at a lot with my DOP were the early Hitchcock films. We have some references to, of course, Vertigo, the staircase shots, or Rebecca, where we enter these majestic buildings where our rich elite is dwarfed by the surroundings. So I think having the camera linger on the characters, the godlike killer's perspective, the overhead shots were key to that. And it's, yeah, so I think that was key. What we also did, we allowed, in order to have the audience become a complicit, we have, in a lot of key scenes, the actors talking to themselves, of course, or to each other, but almost addressing the camera directly. They almost look right into the lens, and therefore, instead of addressing themselves, they also confront and address the audience.
There's also, of course, a lot of nasty details about the killings, and I mean, there's a lot of uneasy images, unsettling images in the show. Can you talk a bit about? I mean, was there a certain line that you didn't want to cross in portraying the gore and aftermath, the grisly details of these killings?
We had a lot of conversations while preparing the show on how to deal with the victims, which are their children. I think personally, one thing we always held high was that it had to be respectful. It shouldn't be sensational and absolutely not exploitative. But we also wanted to understand, make the characters and the audience understand how gruesome these murders are. So when we, for example, find the first victim, well, I think there's some beauty in the decay, and this might sound really wrong, but we wanted to create this almost dreamlike visual of a child brought to slaughter in this white dress. So, but I think being respectful and non-exploitative was key to us.
Right. I wanted to talk to you a bit about the cast. You've got these three great leads, and let's start off with Daniel Brühl as the alienist himself. What made him right for that part, and what was that working relationship like?
Well, I think what Daniel brings to the part is that he brings a lot of enigma and mystery and strength to Chrysler. I think Daniel embodies the character as a pioneer. He's also one that can run a team, because I think what makes part of the show so unique is the chemistry Chrysler, Sarah, and John Moore have. Because all of them, in some kind of way, are alienated from society themselves. They're loners that need each other in order to, overcome this case and find this greater evil. But I think Daniel brings a lot of mystery and unspoken history to these parts.
Mm-hmm. And Luke Evans, I mean, this is a new kind of role for him. We usually see him as the swaggering braggadocio in lots of films. What made him right for the part of John Moore?
Well, I think it's Luke brings a lot of charm to John Moore. I think John Moore is in some kind of way a romantic underachiever who has lost his way. But I think what makes Moore's character so important, and especially Luke's take on it, is that because of his charm, he takes the audience by the hand. He's our way into this world. He's our introduction to people like Chrysler, or people like Sarah Howard, played by Dakota Fanning.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Dakota Fanning being the last of this triumvirate. Can you talk a bit about working with her and about Sarah Howard's character? As you know, I mean, she is the first woman hired on the precinct, the police department in New York. So a bit of a trailblazer there.
Yeah, well, Sarah Howard represents a woman in a man-dominated world, similar to Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, or even Gillian Anderson in The Fall. So I think she is fighting all the boundaries that society puts upon her. Sarah Howard, I think, is finding her voice in a male-dominated world. Something that is very relevant today. And I think what makes Dakota so perfect for this part is that she manages to bring a lot of willpower and strength, but also lost innocence to these parts. So she was the perfect fit, and to team up with Luke and Daniel to become this group of unlikely heroes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and actually, that brings up another interesting point about this show. Her character, she works for Teddy Roosevelt, the police commissioner at the time, and yes, that Teddy Roosevelt, who later becomes the U.S. president. There are a lot of historical figures in this show, and that's something that's in the book, I believe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did that help create this sense of authenticity that you guys were going for?
Oh, definitely. I think because this could have happened. Because although we read, I think it's also an interesting history lesson, because Roosevelt, when he was police commissioner, it felt for him like it was going to be the end of his career, but he was literally fighting corruption. He was fighting his own police force, mainly dominated by an Irish gang, actually. But what was also unique, that talking about his authenticity, and one of our characters is also Jakob Verbruggen. He was a photographer, journalist, that became most famous or best known for a book called How the Other Half Lives, where he photographed the poor immigrant families. And this is a historical fact that Roosevelt went on nightly walks with Jakob Verbruggen to try and understand, as police commissioner, what really lived in the city. Because he was a fortunate man coming from a wealthy family. He was, well, American royalty, if you want to call it that way. But he actually took the efforts to go with Jakob Verbruggen to understand poverty and to understand the real issues that were living in his town when he was police commissioner.
Mm-hmm. As the director, you have to help create a sense of scope for this show, which is, of course, set in a period, and you know, you've got all of these costumed extras and all of this lavish sets and things like that, and you're working on, you know, a TV budget, and I believe you guys had a little bit of a looser, not as tight of a schedule as is generally applied for television shows. But how did you create that sense of scope and help convey the period with the resources you had?
It's all about doing your homework very, very, very well and be prepared, I think. And it's also about gathering, being able, and I think it's TNT and Paramount TV that allowed us to have the budget that we needed. And I think being able to reconstruct the tenement streets and have these brilliant backlots that allow the camera to turn 360 degrees. What makes the Alienist unique also is that 85% of what you see on the screen is real. I think we use CGI very limited, only when we couldn't do anything else, when it just didn't exist, but most of it is real. So, and it helped the actors because they could literally walk out of a house, step into a carriage, do their dialogue, play their scene, be driven around the corner, and then step out again and continue their walk. So it all felt just very real and authentic. And that helped not only me to be able to turn the camera 360 degrees, there was no limitation, but also helped the actors breathing life into their characters.
Well, was there a scene that was particularly difficult to for you to do, either because it was complicated or you just had a hard time wrapping your head around it? Or
I think there's a lot of complicated scenes, but one of the scenes that actually had the most preparation was our introduction to the boy brothel at the end of episode 2, when Luke Moore opens these doors to a world that has not been introduced to the audience yet. So I think we had this, it was a 3-month process almost. Casting these kids, workshopping them, they were actors or dancers, to create this group of prostitutes. So that's one of the scenes that had the most preparation. We also wanted to create this one-shot feel, trying to create a fly on the wall feel for the audience, like we're a little fly flying into this and being unnoticed. So that's one of the scenes that took most preparation, and hopefully it turned out well. I think I'm very proud of that.
Right. You mentioned The Fall earlier, which is something you worked on, and I wanted to bring that up because you got a BAFTA nomination for it, for Best Miniseries. What did that recognition mean for you and for everyone involved in the show?
I think it's always, well, when you make a show, you want to, first of all, to get an audience, people to watch it, and then hopefully people actually enjoy it and take something with them from that series. So I think having the appreciation is, of course, well, it's very nice. It's great.
Well, you've got another great show that you've accomplished here. Jakob, thank you so much, and congratulations on The Alienist.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.